How did this culture start where HR thought it's okay for me to schedule work team bonding outings during an employee's personal time?
I don't know where or how did that begin, but I think it's also very cultural. I wrote a book about the corporate kindergarten, and this looks at all these fun activities where you basically just infantilizing adults, and you play games that 5 years old play at the playground, right? And when I looked at which countries are more prone to these childish games and all that, you go to Asia, you go to other areas, right? Where is it that coming into my private life and taking away my private time is okay? In the West, it's probably not, because not the government is strictly legislating all this. And where these restrictions are not in place, employers push. Employers push as far as they can push.
Szilvia Olah, thank you very much for joining me today. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me on.
So we're talking today about all things HR. The good, the bad, and the ugly of HR. So tell me, for the viewers, a little bit about why you are an HR expert.
Well, expert is a big word, right? But I have spent 9 years now in HR. My study is based on, I have a couple of master's degrees, one in HR and one in organizational psychology. So I study human behavior and I apply it within human resources, within organizations. So I have been here in the region for 14 years. I think I understand the dynamics. And in terms of human resources, that is truly my passion. And I think there's so much work to be done. There is so much understanding. And I think that's the most fascinating department in any of the organizations.
So I'm excited that you're excited about this, because I have so many questions. And let's start with a basic one. What is it that HR's true purpose is compared to what most employees think HR does?
It's an interesting one, right? Because that's the definition of what is our role. So it's difficult to answer because what's happening within the workforce. But the simplest version is that HR is basically managing the employee life cycle. So within those 15, 12 areas, depending on how we break it down, the recruitment, the hiring, talent attraction, learning and development, compensation and benefit, and all these specialized areas are managed by human resources. Now, as you can see, it's extremely complex. And the problem comes from its complexity, because you need specialized or specialist experts within these functions, HR functions. And most of the time, we don't have them in organizations because the structure is very lean. So we put a generalist role or somebody who is coming from a learning and development background or comp and benefit background, and then we put them in charge of everybody else. And most of the time, we don't have the comprehensive knowledge to supervise these specialist functions. So the role of HR is really to manage these, but also to look at what works for the workforce and for the business and do those.
So that, the way you explained it, and that might be the actual proper way in HR that is operating correctly. That's the way it should work, right?
Correct.
But I haven't been in too many organizations where that's the way that it works. And you bring up an interesting question in my mind. How do I get HR to understand that they not only have to do the HR aspect, but they have to learn my skill sets? So they have to learn the department that they're responsible for. And too often I find that the HR rep for that particular department doesn't understand what it is the department does. So you almost need to be, if you're in HR, you need to be an expert in two areas, correct?
So HR is, you need to know when you want to help others, right, what they are doing or what their concerns are and what the perspectives. But within HR functions, and so we can't expect HR to know every department within the business, right? But what we should expect HR to have specialist experts within each of these fields. And that's the problem. We don't have that. what we have is generalist roles, and even head of HR most of the time is a generalist role because grown up with the title of HR supervisor, HR manager, but there's no expertise behind it. It's a very generalist approach. And when you have that, you are going to create some problems because you will not be able to apply any expertise to any of these areas.
But surely after a certain length of time, after a couple of years, the HR rep should know what it is that the department he or she is responsible for does. No? Yes?
So yes and no. Yes, in theory. But once again, we are talking about 12 functions. Now, you cannot be an expert in 12 functions. It's impossible. So that's why I always advocate for removing these generalist roles that cannot help not only the organization, but also the employees or the head of departments and the line managers and the supervisors and the leaders they work with, but putting experts into these layers because you just cannot. So, for example, employment relation, right? It's a massive field. It's all about labor law. It's all about, policies and articles and all that, and negotiation, mediating between the government, for example, the ministry or the employees, etc., etc. It's a massive field. You have to be experts in that. You will not have the capacity to be an expert in any other area. It's probably the largest sub-function of HR in terms of complexity.
Right. All right. So let me ask a specific question. I work in X department, and HR comes to me and says, you have an opening. We need a job description. Is it my responsibility to write the job description, or is it HR's responsibility to write the job description?
The two of you together.
Together.
Yes, because HR doesn't know. So HR's job is to make sure that they create a structure where people can function. Everybody's protected and everybody's, safe and motivated and all that. But when it comes to job description or anything else really, it's, look, if you are in a department, finance, whatever department, I don't know every single finance role. Right? But what I know and what my responsibility is to make sure that everybody in that department knows what is expected of them, right? So we need to sit together and create the job description. But I go even further with job descriptions. Roles are changing so fast. So with each hire, we should be reviewing what is this role about? Do we still need this role? Can we restructure? Does this role maybe, will have a new purpose, or is it going to look the same as before? So everything changes.
So you bring up an interesting idea, which is HR maybe should be thinking outside the box, questioning the way we're doing it. Is it time to change? Do we need to pivot? Do we need to shift gears? And I've discovered that HR too often sees things as checking a box rather than, no, we have to reassess. And this is a big question. How should it work where an HR department is evaluated much like HR departments evaluate all the other departments in a company?
So HR's role is to work together with the business, right? And the business are the employees, the managers, and the leaders. And that's it. So we don't need to overcomplicate that with HR business partner titles and all that kind of, seat at the table. But how we can evaluate HR in terms of their usefulness, because everybody says, oh, HR is not your friend, right? HR is not supposed to be your friend. HR is supposed to be useful for everybody within the organization, right? So if you work together with your stakeholders within the environment or the organization, this is where your value comes from, right? And it's not a tick box exercise, because most of the time this tick box exercise is what is blocking organizations from moving forward. This is what is creating the rift between employees, the leaders, the managers, and HRs. That's why sometimes HR is looked at like, you are not here for the employees, but for the business, right? Now, HR has to be there for both. And if it's a smart HR, it does that by supporting employees, managers, and leaders within the business, making sure that everybody conducts themselves in a way that is not hurting the business. So it's not that complicated, and I think if we evaluated HR this way rather than the tick box exercise, it would be a much better way of working together.
Okay, but if HR is there to almost reflect, say, the CEO or the CEO's vision, what do you do if the CEO is incompetent?
Well, as companies grows, competency drops, right? So every single organization, especially large ones, the level of incompetence is extremely high, right? Because we just dilute the workforce. It is a difficult, and let me put it this way, because many times I get pushback from HR professionals when I highlight our incompetence, right? Because it takes two to tango. So there are probably the large chunk of HR professionals who are not competent in the job that they are doing. There are another part of HR professionals who are competent in their jobs, and they are allowed to do what needs to be done for the business and for the employees, and that's where HR has a good CEO, right? Whoever is supervising HR, but most of the time it's the CEO. And then there are good HR professionals who are, to your examples, who are led by an incompetent CEO, and that CEO thinks that he or she knows better HR than the HR professional, and all they do is fight. And so I can give you an example. You have competent HR people, senior HR leaders who want to fire somebody because of, sexual harassment, and the CEO says no. And then the HR person gets fired. I know senior HR professionals who are being brought into the organization with the agenda and aim of changing things around, but then it's directly the CEO who is blocking all those changes because he says, no, do this, you shouldn't do this, etc., etc.
So is that organization then stuck for the time that HR person and that CEO are there?
Stuck, absolutely. There is no movement because what they are doing, everybody is spending time with is fighting for the agendas, right? I think you should do that. I think we should do that. So I think if you had a very clear HR agenda, what the organization should be focusing on, should be doing, then there shouldn't be a conversation between CEO and a senior HR leader that I think you should be doing that. So a good CEO hires competent people, their head of departments or whatever, leaders, and let them do their job. There are many times LinkedIn conversations that a good CEO should go around and apply for a job once a year in his company to see the process. Absolutely no. I don't know what kind of companies these people are working for, but a good CEO, a professional CEO, is making sure that the stock market, our share prices on the stock market is growing, right? They represent the company in the international stage in terms of meeting with government officials, even country leaders, and advocating for the company, making sure that the company is growing and we are bringing in the money. CEO is not supposed to be involved with employees' welfare. Sometimes I hear that employee engagement is very much down to the CEO. Absolutely not. This is where you are mixing the roles. CEO is working on the company's growth, and the head of department, who he or she hires, is working on their separate areas.
Because I've heard in some companies that I've worked in, I've heard where certain CEOs, they could be called chief everything officer, where they get too involved in issues and conversations that are, quite frankly, below their pay grade. So what do you do when you have an HR team that's not the most proactive, and you have a CEO who has no strategy? Again, you're stuck.
You're stuck. You're not moving forward. Look, I think the healthy conversation between these two parties should be that the CEO says, this is my business objective for the next 1 year, 18 months, 5 years, whatever it is. Then the senior HR leaders should reply, okay, do we know that we have the right talent to achieve these business goals? How do we know that we attract the right talent? How do we know where we are losing talent, right? how do we know what is the environment that is required for us or for you, CEO person, to achieve that business goal? And I think when HR professionals manage to have that conversation, CEOs tend to listen. Because then you can actually have that conversation that, hey, your job is to grow the business, right? My job is to make sure that we create an environment for our employees, allows them to do what they need to do in order to achieve these business goals. So if you don't have the mindset of the people, the CEO and the CHRO, and one is fighting over the other, which I often see, that all they do is fighting, you're just wasting money.
Yeah. So you bring up an interesting idea about the role of HR, which should be to create this environment. What happens, and you and I have talked about this before, what happens when you have an HR department that insists on fun, in quote marks, activities, team bonding activities, but they don't do them during work hours?
Oh, no.
So on the weekend, when it's supposed to be my time, I've done my 40 or 45 hours of work during the week, and then HR almost mandates it. Is there anything that an employee can do to stand up and say, this is my time, without that accusation, without an accusation being thrown at them, you're not a team player?
How often we see that? Oh my God, absolutely. I don't think it's the matter of should employees stand up. I think it's more about the matter of HR should be competent enough not to schedule and intrude people's private time.
Okay, but what if they do? How are you as an employee supposed to respond to that and not have, and there not be a black mark against your name?
I think how people respond to that, they come up with all sorts of lies that are acceptable to stay away from it.
Family obligation,
Absolutely.
I'm sick, I'm traveling.
Absolutely. So we can't play employees anymore. They will find a way. If they don't want to show up for any kind of event, they will make up a story. But once again, it's going back to we should have the expertise and we should be reasonable enough not to intrude employees' private time. Because who is there is not only the HR person who is in charge of working at this company, right? Where's the CEO? Where are other leaders who are saying, you're not going to drag my employees into this?
But then you need a CEO who's going to stand up for his team.
Absolutely.
And I don't know. I've had some who do. I've had some who don't. And what do you do when the CEO doesn't want to say something that's going to put a black mark next to his name? And everybody goes along.
Correct.
There's nothing you can do.
In most cases, there's nothing you can do. I have been the receiving end of that because I cannot stand any of these activities. So I don't normally show up. I show up once a year. But for me, people knew that I will not show up because I just can't stand them. It was very black and white, very straightforward from my side. And when I really had to show up because I knew that that's the event of the year, I never disputed it. I was always, I'm coming for that. But all the small other ones don't even invite me.
So why, how did this culture start where HR thought it's okay for me to schedule team bonding, work team bonding outings during an employee's personal time? How did that begin?
I don't know where or how did that begin, but I think it's also very cultural. Because
so do you think it happens more in the UAE?
Absolutely, and in
Really?
Asia, yes. So even if, I wrote a book about the corporate kindergarten, and this looks at all these fun activities where you basically just infantilizing adults and you play games that 5-year-olds play at the playground, right? And when I looked at which countries are more prone to these childish games and all that. So you go to Asia, you go to other areas, right? So it's very much cultural. Where is it that, coming into my private life and taking away my private time is okay? In the West, it's probably not, because not the government is, strictly legislating all this. And where these restrictions are not in place, employers push. Employers push as far as they can push.
So why wouldn't a company then or an HR department schedule a work outing? And that's what it is. It's not a fun activity. It's a work outing. Why wouldn't they schedule a work outing? I think I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask anyhow. During work hours.
Because you need to get the work done, right? Because you need to get the work done. Look, I come from the hotel industry, and we have a lot of during work hours activities, employee of the month event and all that. And my staff, I always had to push them to go for this 1 hour event. It's a 1 hour once a month, right? So it's not a stretch. You would think, even from HR perspective, we can do that. It's fine. Now that 1 hour, I always had to push my employees go and attend these events, because that 1 hour is taking away from their work hours, and they had to stay overtime to finish their paperwork or at work. So you almost always end up going into there or taking away from their private time.
Okay, so if we're trying to find a solution, you're HR and I'm CEO. How would we have this we get along? How would we have this conversation to make sure that your team bonding stuff happens, but the work gets done, but I'm also standing up for my team and we're not doing it on the weekend? What's the best middle ground that you've experienced?
So I think it's common sense and it's boundaries. There's nothing more to it. If you communicate in advance that, hey, you guys, we're going to do that on that day in a month time, schedule your work in a way that you are not staying over. So let me give you an example. I came from, I worked in London for 9 years, very strict employment labor law, right? So I was trained that there are no overtime for anybody. If I ask you to stay over today for 2 hours, within a week, we had to give back this 2 hours to you. That was it, right? Within a month, we had to clear that, but we worked on a roster that is cleared basically every week. When I moved over here, and all I saw is an insane amount of unpaid labor, insane amount. And when I said, I'm like, what the hell is happening in here? And they said, oh, no, we work like that. So I transitioned my stuff because that's my mindset. We pay you for 40 hours. I want you to work 40 hours. Now, I come from the hospitality industry. As a manager, I will work 60 hours, okay? But that's my choice. That's my decision. For the line employees, never. So I transitioned my staff that they cannot work more than their contracted hours. And when they were staying over, so I trained them, right? When they're staying over, because it was a transition, that, 1 hour, I just need to finish this. At one point, I said, you're going home. Yes, but I didn't drop my cash, for example, which is absolute no-no, right? I'm like, go home. I took their paperwork. I locked it in the cabinet. I'm like, you do it tomorrow. And they got into trouble with finance. I got into trouble with finance because where is the cash? But that was their training. I had to train them to go home on time. So if you were the CEO and I'm the HR person, it's common sense. Is this the value that we want to, communicate, that there are boundaries, or the value that we want to communicate, or the message that I can, push your boundaries anytime I want because I have the power?
So now that I have you in front of me, I have some instincts about what I think is common sense and what isn't. But I want to hear what you have to say. So when it comes to the monthly acknowledgement, recognition of good employees and birthday gatherings, how do you feel about those?
So here is the thing. It's never about how we feel, how employees feel, right? Because HR, CHROs, senior leaders, CEOs, they always go after these. Everybody's doing these activities, so we have to do them.
Right. Nobody
cares what we want.
Who's we? The employee?
No, there's leaders.
Okay.
What employees actually want? Do they want this monthly birthday cake, right? What do they want as part of their recognition? Now, I'm not saying not to do them, but my problem with that, and that's my personal opinion, and also a professional to some degree, that my problem with these activities, that they don't increase engagement. They don't have any positive correlation to productivity, to happiness, to well-being, to engagement, to all the buzzwords that we are talking about. So the question is, why are we doing them? And if you want to do them, do them. But if these are the only things that you do with the aim of, lifting the spirit and bringing people together or engaging people, it's not working. They yield zero result.
So one of the things that I think would work more effectively is if HR had less of an ego, turn to the employees, maybe the people who have been there for 16 years, and say, you've been here a long time. I've been here a couple of years. What is it that you think? And if they did it either in a one-on-one or in an anonymous way, something where people would feel comfortable because you're not giving away state secrets and you're not putting anyone in an awkward spot. You're just asking for recommendations. Why doesn't a company, and I'm going to put it on HR, but why wouldn't HR take that initiative where they would ask the employees?
Well, we pretend to ask through the surveys.
Pretend to ask.
Yeah, we pretend to ask, but when we get answers that we don't like, we just ignore them, right? So I always advocate, go back to whoever you're serving, right? If you are a CEO, you are serving your stakeholders, so look at what they want. So if you are a leader or in HR, go back to your employees and ask them, what do you want on the recognition, for example, right? And they will tell you. Not two sides to this. And that's my organizational psychology background where it comes into. People are so brainwashed that when I ask employees, what do you want? They came up with the same answers. Employee of the month engagement, team outing, barbecue on the beach, and all that. So we need to look at the workforce that we are serving, right? Can they think for themselves? Or they are very much on their from the culture that is, is a group thinker kind of culture. And the second is absolutely, we should ask employees what they want, and this is where our expertise comes into the picture. Because if it's me, I know I don't want any of these activities, so it's reasonable to assume that maybe others don't want to have any of these activities. So I go out there and I ask. And when I receive answers that are exactly the same that we are doing right now, right, or we've been doing, then I offer alternatives, because now I need to think for them. They can't see options because all they can see is what they have experienced, right? So my expertise must come into the picture and come up with alternatives that I think it's useful, I think would make a difference, and they would enjoy and they would want. Because loss aversion, you can't take away anything without providing something else, because people just hold on to it, even if it's not working.
So you talk a lot about the environment. How do we move away from offices that have too many meetings? Now, in previous jobs, I've actually rejected meeting requests when there hasn't been an agenda. And sometimes you just get people saying, why did you reject that meeting? And I'll say, and you're not accusing anyone of anything, you're not being aggressive in your response, but again, you're not seen to be a team player when you're trying to hold other people to account so that your time isn't wasted.
Yep.
So how do I, for the next job, how do I make sure that I'm attending meetings, even if there are a lot, but at least meetings that are worthwhile?
So I think that's the culture. This is when it comes down from the top, right? Because if the top has any sort of common sense, and I was just reading a report, the average time we spend on meetings is around between 25 to 32% per week.
Good gracious. That's a lot.
So Google has done the calculation, right? So there are smart ways of doing it. So in their Google Calendar, they uploaded everybody's salaries, and then it breaks down per minute how much you earn, how much. So if we spend 1 hour in here, this is what it actually costs. So they put a cost to it. And that literally just opened their eyes that, hey, does it really worth $2,000 for us to discuss whatever we discussed for 1 hour? Is there going to be a higher output as a result of it? Are we solving any problem? So they cut that very quickly when they started seeing the money that we spend on it. But meeting culture is a plague, is people pretend that they work, but they don't actually work. So they love spending their time on meetings, on useless meetings. And most of these meetings, up to like 90%, don't yield any outcome.
I also think that, I think a lot of us use Teams, right? And the default setting for Teams meetings, if I'm not mistaken, is an hour. Mm-hmm. And I think it should be 30 minutes, right? Mm. And then maybe you can get meetings done in 15 minutes, right? The other thing that I don't find very comforting if I am working in a company is where my line manager doesn't respect the start and finish of a meeting, the timing. So if they're consistently 5 or 7 minutes late, or the meeting runs over, and how do you get your line manager to respect the process that should be in place so that we're all working more efficiently?
So these are the things, these are the areas in HR that is part of the culture, right? And culture is definitely not in the hands of HR, it's in the hands of all of us, right? But if these policies, these, practices that we do don't come from the top and there is no consequences, it's never going to change. So problems that are created at the top can be only solved by the top. I can be a line manager, I can be whoever, but I will never achieve any results. So sometimes, we have problems and then we call up the line employees for brainstorming. I'm like, it's nothing to do with them. They already know the problem better than we do. You created the problem up there. All of these cultural aspects are your problem because you tolerated it. What we reward and tolerate is what becomes the culture, right? So if it's long meeting hours, if it's, why don't we have a policy, which I know a company, I forgot its name, you can attend maximum 2 meetings per week. And you have the right to refuse everything else. So here, you actually rely on your common sense and decision-making, which is the most important meeting for me. Do I need to attend the sales and marketing meeting every single week? Like, what are we talking about every single week, right? I'm not even part of that team. So 2 meetings, and you get to choose which one.
Moving on to another important issue that I think all companies face, and certainly all employees, is the performance evaluation. And when I'm entering into it in January, and I know because HR has been transparent, and they've said, look, there are no bonuses on the table. There's no chance for a pay increase. Mm-hmm. I guess it's a 2-part question. First, why does HR still insist on doing it? And B, is there anything that as a line manager or an employee that I can do to not participate?
So you can't do anything not to participate. You can't opt out of these processes. Once I threw the idea, I'm like, can I opt out of any of these processes? And my manager said that, no, you can't. But even if it was the case, you would not get promotion. You would not be eligible for promotion.
That's what HR uses. They say, oh, no, because if there ever is a salary increase or there ever is a promotion, and we don't have that chain of command.
Yeah.
But if I've been at a company for 4 years, surely they know me. And isn't that just BS?
Yeah. It is. So we know that the performance management system is broken. It's not managing performance. It's not even measuring performance. So it doesn't do any of this, what it was built for. Why do we do them? Well, in the West, because of legislation. So, we need to have records in case we want to fire you. Yes, absolutely. We need to fire you, all that. Now, my question...
But I want to say this. Sorry to interrupt you. I don't think that the performance evaluations are there for that promotion that may or may never come. I think it's there so that they have a reason to fire you.
So it's for multiple reasons, right? One of them is to fire you. So we have some, documentation in case it comes to labor court and all that. It should manage and measure performance, but it doesn't do. My problem is with organizations that if we know that this particular process doesn't do what it's supposed to do, why don't we sit down and redesign it? Nobody is against performance management. We are against performance management as it is currently. That is more punitive than developmental.
Because I think you could have a performance evaluation where, look, we've all worked at companies that struggle. And I'm not saying that every year there should be a bonus or there should be some salary adjustment. That's unrealistic. But what if it was something like, instead of working 40 or 45 hours a week, you're working 30 for a couple of weeks, or you get an extra day or two off, right? These are things that HR can allow to happen, yes?
Yeah. So the flexibility is, we have flexibility. We can come up with it. And we have seen organizations doing that. Instead of making people redundant, they shared. They went down to 30 hours, everybody. They kept everyone, lowered the salary, and not by making that as a decision, as an executive decision, but asking the workforce, hey guys, we either lose these 10 people or we all go down to 30 hours, we all reduce a little bit of our salary, but they can stay. And the workforce decided, we want to keep these 10 people. So the opportunities are endless, but we need creativity and we need expertise, and we need to communicate to employees. If you are struggling with your employee or performance management, for example, go back to your employees. They will have the answer to you. They will have the answer to you, and then you get together and then you figure it out, because then you bring your expertise. Yeah, you can't do that. We can't do that, but we can do this. And then you redesign your processes. How it is today, I have never seen a redundancy based on these performance evaluations. I never seen a salary increase based on these annual appraisal. And we basically don't use it for anything that it was intended to be used.
Because tell me, I'm not going to lead you in this question. I'm going to ask it properly. In your experience, what are salary increases or bonuses based on?
So it's a flat annual increase, 2 to 5% every year.
But if it's not going to everyone, is my point.
Oh, okay.
So there are, 150 people on the team. And there is an opportunity to give a bonus or salary increase to 50. In your experience, how do they settle on the 50 who get it?
Well, it's who likes who, right?
Yes, thank you. That's exactly what I was trying to get you to say.
It's who likes who. It's definitely. Now, that's why we like the structure. Pros and cons to everything, right? I always say, I love structure, especially with these things, because we don't want to, give money to just because you are the friend with the CEO. That's not how we want to do that. But with the structured one, it has the negative side that you might not get as much as you want. But definitely the fair and the unfairness of practices. I've seen companies in the past 2 years where they don't have these structures, and it's literally it's all based on relationships.
Something else I want to ask you about. So we were talking just before we started recording that there is an issue, a tradition here, and I've been here more than 2 decades, so I don't know if it exists, where I'm from in Canada, where the employer will ask you for a pay slip based on what you were earning at your last job. First of all, is that happening around the world? And how did that tradition start in Dubai and Abu Dhabi?
So I have started seeing this. This is the most ridiculous thing. I always urge HR professionals to think before they do anything, because these are the small things. They are ruining the organization's reputation. So we started to see this in the past year and a half, maybe, that companies are asking during the recruitment process, hey, can you please send me your pay slip? No employers have the right to do that. Now, it's not illegal, but
if I want the job, I'm going to play ball.
It's unethical. Why would you do that? Now, if you are a company who says we pay 20% more than your last salary because that's your pay strategy, and you ask for the pay slip, I can't disagree with that. Good for you. You might need some proof.
But as an employee, I'm also coming out 20% guaranteed more.
Absolutely. Now, if you have a proper pay structure, You don't have to ask payslip because you tell this is the salary and that's it. So it's a really irritating new practice that I started to see, and I urge everybody in the GCC to stop this. I'm not joking.
Sylvia has spoken. Everybody has to
I urge
stop
everybody because, first of all, you are ruining the reputation of your company. I would not work for you. You are showcasing your incompetence. And I also urge business leaders and CEOs in this case, and whoever is governing this organization, to look into what HR is doing. Because in most cases, or in many cases probably, the leadership doesn't even know what HR is up to. Because they would read something on the WhatsApp group, the UAE HR WhatsApp group, which I left because of the level of the conversations. And they would ask, oh, can I ask for the payslip? Somebody would comment, yes, you can. And from then onward, it becomes a widespread practice. Absolutely not. Use your common sense. Why do I need this? And what's the negative impact that I can have?
But we both know that HR would sort of see it as, I've helped the company because I've saved the company money, because I've had proof of what they were earning before. We only went up 6% compared to what they were. They were desperate for a job. I hold all the cards as HR. So HR would probably disagree with you, though.
Correct. But that's a very short-term thinking, right? It's a very short-term thinking. If you are underpaying me, we have data that people will change jobs very quickly, right? Within the first year, they will go. Now, we all take jobs because we are desperate. The bills have to be paid, right? So if you play that, you know that you are going to lose that person. Plus, now you are building a reputation within the workforce that what kind of an employer are you doing unethical stuff.
But in Abu Dhabi and Dubai, and I've now worked at 6 companies in Abu Dhabi and Dubai, it's standard practice.
It shouldn't be.
So there isn't going to be one company that's going to stand out as being less professional than the others because they're all doing it.
Yep. But, it's how do you want to represent yourself as a HR person as well, right? What is the purpose of that, asking the payslip? And once again, the short-term thinking. I urge HR people to conduct surveys. Going back to your employees, not surveys per se, right? Ask your employees that how do you feel about the recruitment experience? And this is where we don't have any data, right? Because then they would tell you, oh, I didn't really appreciate me being asked for my payslip or whatever we do during recruitment. So when we start designing employees' experiences this way, that we start measuring and asking feedback about every touch point, every interaction within the organization, we could clearly see where we go wrong.
But you would need to have a survey system set up in such a way that I could answer hopefully anonymously, because I think that, but I think we know that if I were to answer something anonymously and I were to be professional but be very critical, I think that would come back to hurt me, because I think HR can be too sensitive and they would need to find out who said what they said. And then I think there goes your anonymity. So I don't think you're going to get honest answers. And I think, sorry, the one last thing is, and it sounds like I'm on my soapbox and I apologize, but I think, because I'm this age and I've worked in a lot of places in Japan, Canada, Doha, UAE, and I think that there are companies that have an awful lot of employees that have learned how to be, to protect their ability to maintain their job. And so HR might say something is anonymous, but the employee knows that there's no way that that's anonymous. So I can't be 100% honest.
So measuring all these areas is very easy because we have systems, fantastic platforms today. In terms of HR being very sensitive, 100%. But then we need to go back to the purpose of HR. Why are you there? Is it to protect your ego? Is it to cover up your own incompetence? Is it to serve the business? Because you need to pick one. And when you are covering up your incompetence, serving your ego, then you are there for yourself. you're never going to solve any of the employees' problems, right? So HR's role is problem solving. I think every role, especially when you go into leadership, right, is a problem solver role. And what are the problems that HR is solving currently? We don't know because we are just using one fancy activity after another, right? So we're throwing these buzzwords. But these are the problems that employees are having. And if you are not open to it, if you can't see your problem, you can't look at your problem, you can't solve them. And as for the anonymity of surveys, I work for 3 large companies, more or less. I have never seen a survey that was not anonymous. I heard companies saying and employees that they found out immediately that I was the one who is giving. I have never seen that firsthand, so I can speak to my 3 other companies. But I started to see also the rise of employee engagement surveys that is dedicated to your specific code, right? So that's obviously, that is not anonymous. Now, going back to it, which shouldn't be, because then you are not collecting valuable information, because now you know that nobody's going to tell you the truth. And it's your choice if you want to be, oblivious to what you are dealing with, or you actually want to solve problem. If you don't want to solve problem, this is when you are going to look at who said what, right? And you are more occupied with who said what than the actual problem. That's not your job. If you don't want to solve a problem, this is when you are going to get rid of some of the information about your employee engagement surveys. I have seen that sometimes. When you don't want to solve a problem, this is when you're not going to ask questions, or you just quiet the workforce, right? I don't like working like that, because my job is to solve problems, solve the business problem and solve the employees' problems. But for me to do that, I need to see the problem. I need to be aware of it. And if you want to hide away from it, it's just because it's your ego. You can't, take feedback, or you are incompetent and you acknowledge that you don't have the skills, the knowledge, and the expertise to solve those problems.
So another issue that a lot of companies will face is that you'll have whoever's in charge holding regular town hall meetings. And we've talked a little bit about the good and the bad of those. What, in your mind, is the ideal setup for an effective town hall meeting?
So in my previous experience with Accor, we had town hall meeting, and it wasn't a frequent event. It was when they had something to tell us, right? So sometimes it happened every month. Sometimes just happened quarterly. The big boss would come, sometimes the CEO, here's the town hall, this is what happened. And it was 5 minutes, 15 minutes, pass the message, ask a few questions or answer to a few questions, and that was it. And it has to be informative. Is the town hall meeting sometimes that I see is all about the leader polishing him or herself, right? This is what I did, this is what we did, and all that kind of things. Are town hall meetings relevant, right? The information that you are putting across, is it relevant? Do we need to communicate that to the workforce? What part of it we need to communicate to the workforce? Because sometimes you can't share everything. But effective meeting, town halls, is literally, is my workforce interested in this message that I want to tell them? And not to sit there for an hour, for 45 minutes, in and out, 15 minutes, and finish it off. I see that working really well.
Okay, and then one of the other questions that I have, and I've done 3 months and I've done 6 months. When it comes to probationary periods, and in this part of the world, very different. Where I come from in North America, in Canada, it's usually a couple of weeks, maybe a month. But here in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, I was shocked. I think my first job here, it was for sure at least 3, it might have been 6 months. And as I say, I've done both. Why such a prolonged probationary period? I've hired a lot of people at the time that I've been here. And for me, you can look at the person's CV. Maybe you also will have reached out to a reference or two. And that's before you even sat down with the person. And then you sat down with the person and you'll hopefully ask some pointed questions and you'll get a sense of that person's vibe and how they might fit in with the rest of the team. So before you've offered them a job, or before it's gone to HR to go through their due diligence, you should have a pretty good sense. And yet it can go on for 3 weeks or 3 months or 6 months. Why is that a healthy approach where it's so long? And how did we get to the point where 6 months is acceptable?
6 months is not acceptable by any measure, right? Or by any mean. It's unnecessary, even for the law, to be compliant and all that.
What
right?
is the law?
So it depends. I don't know the recent one, so I wouldn't comment on that. But it's not necessary. So I was working with one of the companies related to probation period. And my question is always, do we need this? Why are we doing this, right? So always going back to the why are we doing this? What is the purpose of this process? And if we don't have a strong argument, get rid of it. Like there is no, like Netflix got rid of it because they actually collected data. So Netflix looked at out of 10,000 employees, 2 didn't pass the probation. So they said, for 2 people, we are not going to put everybody through this purgatory period, right? Because it's just painful. You're halfway in, halfway out. Am I doing? Am I staying? What am I doing?
You have a bad day, you start to freak out.
Absolutely, yeah. So hire people, but first of all, have data. But ask any HR, do you actually have data how many of them did not work out, right? They would have some, but why it did not work out? Maybe it's nothing to do with the employee. Maybe it's your onboarding. Maybe it's your line manager. Maybe it's the environment. So there you can put any kind of probation period, right? So I don't disagree necessarily with probation period, but I was working with one of the companies here, and they got rid of it. And I always tell HR that sit down with legal, right? Go back to the labor law, study. What are the requirements? And these guys, they actually found a way that, hey, we don't actually need probation period here. We can actually decide. So what they put in place that after 1 month, so that was your training period, right? After 1 month, you're supposed to work autonomously, and the training prepared the employee to equip them with the skills, the knowledge, and everything that they need to do their job. And from month 2, we designed it in a way that they immediately go into performance management with clear KPIs. And if you don't achieve your KPIs, your deliverables, in 2 consecutive quarters, then you're out automatically.
What do you do from an HR point of view when HR knows that they have a line manager who's not that good, maybe even toxic? They know, at the very least, the team is struggling. And in the best case scenario, maybe the team is actually very good and would perform better without the line manager. Why is there the fear to get rid of the line manager who everybody seems to acknowledge was maybe not the best hire, or maybe they were promoted and they're just not suited for that role? How should HR deal with a line manager that's just not working?
I think our ability to have honest and tough conversations is literally zero. We can't be humans anymore. So HR would come with their checklist, answers, and, we have looked at your blah, 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 and everybody gets lost in the message. So having tough conversations, and even before that, before we get there, do we have a system, a process that picks it up at the very beginning? Because that manager did not start misbehaving today, right? People leave their little marks and they build up these, incompetent behavior over time. So where was the first time? Or who was, maybe this person's been there for 5 years and the previous management allowed that behavior. But now there's a change in management, right? So you go back and you always find that we allowed these behaviors to prosper, really. And now there is no going back, because now that became the norm. And then if you go to the person that, hey, you're not behaving, we have complaints. Why? But I have been always like that. Yes, of course. So I think what HR is supposed to be doing is is having information from the workforce and presenting it to managers and leaders that, hey, these are the things that are coming out from your team. What are we going to do? But once again, not approaching managers and leaders or anybody with the intent that I'm going to punish you, but with the intention of I'm going to help you to get, better. I always say that L&D strategy is extremely easy, and that maybe it's not even HR, but L&D, when we want to change behavior. We train you for the skills that you need for the job you can do the job in. We train you for the knowledge that you need for your job, and we train you for the behaviors that makes you, everybody like working with you. And that's the risk to it. So if people don't like working with you, no matter how good you are in your job, we need to take action.
Szilvia Olah, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you very much.